Well, Donald Trump just played into Vladimir Putin's hand again, and for some reason, some made-for-TV reason, half the country still thinks their president is a deal-maker's deal-maker.
You either have it or you don't. And once you have it, if you have it, then you go out and you hone those skills.
In truth, he had bankrupted 4 of his businesses and was not all that successful. But in order to make the show a success, we had to make him as successful as we possibly could.
But on the world stage, with the future of Ukraine hanging in the balance, Trump sent his very best team to square off against their Russian counterparts to make the best effort to win peace. Well, in today's scathing video, Puck News correspondent and Russian-American journalist Julia Ioffe offered a report card earlier on CNN on this very controversial, fast-moving summit. Now, here's some internationally flavored backstory to whet our appetite before we get right into our red-hot video that's coming right up.
One war, 2 summits, many players. That is how Ukraine's future will be decided. We know that President Donald Trump would shake things up. We knew that he would, but perhaps not this much. He's pushing ahead with talks to end the war, and guess what? He's not even consulting Ukraine. He wants to move fast. We have mentioned the strategy before. It's called shock and awe. Make rapid moves before your enemies and allies can catch their breath. That's what Trump is doing right now. Just look at his timeline. Last Wednesday, he spoke to President Putin. On Friday, Vice President J.D. Vance met Zelensky. On Sunday night, Trump's team headed to Saudi Arabia. Tomorrow, they will meet the Russians. And by the end of this month, Trump could meet Vladimir Putin. That's the latest assessment. Do you see how fast things are moving? Even Ukraine and Europe have been caught off guard.
So this is what the Russians had to say about the preliminary meeting with our fearsome Western diplomats.
Не обязательно это означает сблизить позиции, но я уже об этом сказал. Практически договорились, что нужно решительно, раз и навсегда, проблему.
Okay, we definitely want to close caption that next time, but he certainly sounded confident of his negotiating skills to me, in fairness. Here's what Marco Rubio offered in return.
The U.S. delegation that just wrapped up their meetings with the Russians, are you walking away with this with any agreements for any follow-up conversations?
Дело была воспроизведена на наших переговорах с американской стороны.
Well, sorry about that. Don't know how that happened. Must have been some kind of a in the machine. No, they're definitely not a mouthpiece for the Russians. They're earnestly negotiating on behalf of the fearless Ukrainians who are not invited.
The goal is to bring an end to this conflict in a way that's fair, enduring, sustainable, and acceptable to all parties involved. What that looks like, well, that's what the ongoing engagement is going to be all about.
Well, let's see what Julia Ioffe had to say about Team Rubio's negotiating debut with the minions from Trump's betrothed earlier on CNN.
Julia, set the scene for us as you see it, these talks. Are they real? I mean, is this substantive? What do you think?
Well, I think, unfortunately, they're massively substantive just in terms of the meeting itself taking place and the format of the meeting and the fact that Europe isn't at the table, that Ukraine isn't at the table, and that one of the things they've already agreed to is restoring the staffs of the respective embassies in Moscow and Washington. If you recall, the staffs that were kicked out, the quote-unquote diplomats that were kicked out, the Russian diplomats that were kicked out were mostly Russian spies under diplomatic cover. So the fact that the U.S. just agreed to let them back into the U.S. is a massive win for Russia. And if you watch Sergei Lavrov's, the Russian foreign minister's press conference afterwards, it was very much the press conference of a victor. That the very fact that the U.S. just came back to the negotiating table with them, didn't get anything in response, that the U.S. bit on this proposal by Kirill Dmitriev that American companies will be allowed back into Russia, et cetera, underscores the point that for Russians, for Putin, Americans are weak, we're soft, we're cowardly, and we're motivated only by money. And the fact that we're biting on all of this, that the U.S. is biting on all of this, just as proof of concept for Putin, that all he had to do was wait Biden out and get his guy back in the White House, and he's getting everything he wants and more.
I wonder when you hear Secretary of State Marco Rubio say that both sides will have to make concessions, what concessions is Russia ready to make?
I don't think any. And I don't know what concessions they're being asked to make by the Americans. I think the other point I think that's very interesting is that the whole time Russia has been saying, why do we need Ukraine at the table? Why do we need the Europeans at the table? The Europeans are weak and not substantive. The two superpowers, the US and Russia, should be the ones to decide Ukraine's fate without Ukraine. Ukraine is little and it doesn't matter. And the US never agreed with that approach, and now we got a new administration that does that, and also concedes that Russia is on par with the US, even though it is not economically, militarily, and we just gave that to them again for nothing.
And so, as the deity of the Republican Party gives away the store that you, your parents, maybe your grandparents, built over the years through generations of trust in a system that made this country actually great in the eyes of the world, including the Ukrainians, who apparently were just sold out as well. Now the only eye to worry about is the one Margaret Atwood pointed out, but apparently we didn't open soon enough.
Under his eye. Under his eye.